Well, of course, all of these animals that have venom are not to be trifled with, especially if one wants to remain in a fairly healthy condition. It's somewhat surprising to learn that there are literally hundreds of animals in nature that have venoms of one type or another. For some reason, this field of animal venoms and poisons has not received much study in this country, at least up until the time of World War II. We're fortunate in having with us as our guest scientist this evening one of the few scientists in the country who qualifies as a top expert in this most specialized field of animal venoms and poisons. He's Dr. Bruce Halstead of the School of Tropical and Preventive Medicine, College of Medical Evangelists at Loma Linda, California. Incidentally, Dr. Halstead received some of his early training right here at the California Academy of Sciences. And so naturally, we're quite glad to have him with us on the program this evening. Welcome to Science in Action, Bruce.
Good evening, Earl. Glad to be here.
Why don't you have a chair?
Thank you.
I understand you're just back from another trip out to Saipan.
Yes, we were out there doing a little work on poisonous fishes.
Well, I know that you're knee-deep in these various projects for the U.S. Public Health Service, the U.S. Air Force, and, of course, the Office of Naval Research. Perhaps you can tell us why it is that it is only in these recent years that in this country we've become interested in these animal venoms.
Well, I believe it's a natural outcome of World War II. You see, if we'll take a look on this globe here this evening, you will note as to the distribution of some of these venomous animals. Here we have throughout the South Pacific and various islands off of the coast of Australia, in areas around the Indian Ocean and in certain parts of Africa, the distribution of a great many venomous animals. It was in this same area, these same areas, that we had a great many military men stationed throughout the war. So it was quite natural for us to become interested in these animals.
Well, I suppose that if a person is in these tropics and subtropics for a long enough period of time, sooner or later he's bound to come across some of these poisonous animals.
You bet. It might be anything from a stinging coral to a poison spine fish. There are actually hundreds of animals in the tropics that may be dangerous to man.
Well, I suppose we could say then that the snakes and the spiders don't actually have a monopoly on venoms.
Not by a long shot, as you well know, being a fish man. Let's examine some of the members of the animal kingdom, from the simplest one-celled creatures up through some of the more complex forms, such as mammals. You will find venomous animals at all levels. Some of them are toxic enough to kill, while others may just produce a good dose of pain for a while.
Well, now let's see. The dinoflagellates are probably among the most primitive of poisonous animals. And this sketch that we see here is a drawing of an organism known as goniolax. And goniolax is responsible for the red tide in Florida, which yearly kills great numbers of fishes, and also for the mussel poisoning, which we have along our own California coast during certain months of the year. Well, now, about the first forms, as we proceed up the animal scale, about the first forms that are large enough for us actually to see that have venoms are the sea anemones. And here's one right in here, and I'm going to give him a bit of fish while Dr. Halstead tells you about some of these poison mechanisms that they have.
These are local anemones. They are not poisonous, but they are closely related to some of our more poisonous tropical species. If a fish should come in contact with the tentacles of one of these anemones, they would be instantaneously paralyzed by them.
You know, it's a surprising thing that an animal like this has such a potent venom weapon. I have a sketch here of this actual venom cell. I wonder if you'd give us an idea of just how that operates.
Yes, I'd be glad to. This trigger-like mechanism is known as a nematocyst. You will note here on the top there is a trigger. If this trigger is touched, it is instantly released. And attached to the trigger is a hollow coiled tube through which the venom is discharged. So that in a discharged cell, you would see that it would look something like this.
You know, these anemones are very nice, but it's difficult to imagine that they do have such a venom apparatus.
Oh, there are quite a few forms like this among the lower animals. You have the stinging coral that can cause a very painful wound. Then there is the poison spine starfish. It looks like a regular starfish, only it is covered with spikes. There are poison-spined sea urchins. And, of course, there is that deadly jellyfish, the Portuguese man-of-war.
That Portuguese man-of-war is one fellow that I personally don't want to have much to do with. During the atom bomb tests at Bikini and the fish investigations, I had the misfortune to be slapped on the back by just a small one. It was only about the size of, I'd say 3/4 of an inch across the top of it, and yet it was fully 3 days before I had recovered from the effects of that venom.
Perhaps it's a good thing that we do not have a live one with us this evening, Earl. Fortunately, these are inhabitants of more tropical waters, common throughout the South Pacific. Here is a model of one.
I might mention that unlike the ordinary jellyfish, which is entirely in the water, the Portuguese man-of-war has this upper part in the form of a balloon, and that floats on the surface of the water. And extending down into the water are these lethal tentacles containing the poison cells that Dr. Halstead has brought out.
Attached to these tentacles are many hundreds of these stinging cells, such as the type that we have just described for the sea anemone. Now, if a human being were to become entangled in these tentacles, then he would likely to suffer from a partial or a complete respiratory paralysis as a result of the venom that is released through the stinging cells of the tentacles, especially if it were a large Portuguese man-of-war, say one that approached a foot across with these tentacles hanging down in the water some 40, 50, 60 feet.
Well, I'd say it's quite fortunate that we don't have the Portuguese man-of-war along our own California coast here, and of course it's primarily a tropical animal. Now let's see, if we move up in the animal scale to the next group of animals, we come upon the mollusks, or the soft-bodied animals. And in that group, we have the snail and the clam and the bivalves, and of course, probably the most important and the most popular is the octopus. Bob Debster's bringing a big 40-pound octopus into the laboratory right this minute, and here I'll help you with that, Bob. Now we'll ease him out here and get him down. Ah, there he goes. Now, this octopus, although he weighs about 40 pounds, actually is not a full-grown octopus, because when he's full-grown, he will weigh about 120 pounds and have a tentacle spread of some 15 to 17 feet. He comes from deep water and cold water in Monterey Bay, California, about 600 feet straight down. The temperature of this water in the aquarium here has to be kept at 50 degrees, and of course, at Steinhardt Aquarium, we keep them at that same temperature. Now, notice that under part there, that's where the beak and the poison gland is located, and Dr. Halstead is going to give you an idea of just how that apparatus functions.
Probably most people do not realize that the primary weapon of the octopus is not necessarily the tentacles, but rather this beak, to which is attached a pair of salivary glands, one on either side of the beak. Now, there is a duct that connects to the mouth opening of this beak so that the octopus can take this venom, spray it over a crab if, for instance, he is trying to capture a crab for his food. The crab will soon become paralyzed, and as soon as the crab is completely paralyzed, then the octopus can move in and eat the crab at its leisure with little or no difficulty.
I believe there's one thing we should straighten out, Bruce, and that is the fact that this venom that is associated with the octopus beak is entirely different from the ink that an octopus ejects whenever he happens to be agitated or frightened or attacked even.
That's absolutely correct, Earl. You see, this ink has nothing to do with the venom apparatus of the octopus. Actually, the ink is used as a defense mechanism to cover up the activities, the movements of the octopus.
Oh, I see. Well, now, you were telling me about one of the most treacherous of all the first cousins of the octopus.
Yes, we have two shells here this evening. They are known as a cone shell. They're quite common on many of the beaches of the South Pacific, and supposing that a soldier were to walk along this beach, pick up one of these cone shells, place it in the palm of his hand, he would quite likely find that a slug-like creature would come out of the shell and then emit a harpoon-like structure, one of the teeth, which is hollow and capable of transmitting or discharging a venom. Now, this venom may produce a respiratory paralysis again within a period of 4 hours or up to 14 days. It can be very serious.
Well, I suppose we should say that although we do have cone shells here along our California coast, actually the species we have here is not poisonous.
That's correct. These two examples, the textile cone and the geographic cone, which we have just discussed, are members, inhabitants of the tropical waters, very common throughout Micro and Melanesia.
Well, I'd just as soon leave that and go to something a little bit more cheerful. Let's pass on up the animal kingdom to the next group, which will be the joint-legged animals, the arthropods. And, of course, before the arthropods, we have the worms, and then passing from that into the joint-legged or arthropod group, the spiders, the scorpions, the centipedes, the millipedes, and the insects. Now, I suppose that you have a lot of poisonous forms in that category, do you not?
Yes, we do. Among the worms, there is the annelid worm that acts something like a cactus. If you handle him, little poisonous stickers are likely to come off in your skin, but he's a relatively mild offender. But as you say, there are countless venomous arthropods. Almost all spiders have some venom apparatus, and of course there's the scorpion and the centipede and the tarantula, which we have already shown to our audience. But very few of these are potent. The most dangerous of all is the black widow spider. But there are lesser-known venoms, too, like the millipede, for instance, whose venom was not even known till this last war. The tropical millipede does not bite or sting, but he squirts a liquid through his pores, which can produce a very painful skin irritation.
Well, you know, that's a new one to me. I've collected these fellows quite a number of times in the past, but I never knew they had a venom. Now, is that actually a venom?
Well, after a sort, you'll recall that there are all types of venoms. This one happens to be a skin irritant. They're not all as powerful as the type found in the Portuguese man-of-war, nor as in the turkey fish. And since we have mentioned fish, suppose we stop and discuss the group for a while.
Most certainly the turkey fish is the most attractive and also the most poisonous of any of the fishes that we have had on display at the aquarium.
Well, the turkey fish is probably one of the most beautiful of all of our fish, but with this beauty, he is loaded with stinging spines all along the back and sides. He is one of the most dangerous of all venomous fishes, and there are quite a number of venomous fishes.
Now, we could spend a whole evening talking about nothing but poison spine fishes. I suppose there are more venom carriers among the fishes as a group, are there not, than among most of the other animal groups?
Yes, but we must remember one thing, Earl, and that is that there are probably more varieties of fish than there are most other vertebrates. Now, in contrast to the turkey fish, which is a beauty, we have this ugly thing, the deadly stonefish, which lurks off the coasts of various tropical islands of the Pacific.
Well, that doesn't look like very much, but I'd say a blob of mud probably be the most descriptive term to apply to him.
Yes, you might call it that. This thing is a very dangerous animal. It is very common along the coasts of South Africa, and again, as I've mentioned, throughout certain portions of the tropical Pacific.
Is this the fellow who is reputed to cause the loss of a leg if a person should happen to actually step on the fish?
Yes, it is. People have been known to lose limbs as a result of contacting or receiving a wound from one of the spines along the back here. Now, there are two types of venoms that are found or produced by this fish. One is a neurotoxin, that acts as a, well, it produces various types of nervous disturbances, such as various sensory disturbances, partial paralysis, extreme pain. There is also another venom, which is known as a hemotoxin, which destroys blood cells. There is an additional reaction that goes along with this picture. There may be constriction of the blood vessels, which results in very poor circulation to the part, thus facilitating gangrene and hence the loss of the limb.
Oh, I see. Well, now, you were telling me about clearing up some points in connection with these different kinds of poisons.
Well, that is an important point. I'm glad you brought that out. When we talk about poisonous fish and apply it to an animal such as this, actually that's a misnomer. This is not a poisonous fish. This fish produces its damage as a result of these spines along the back, which aid in the secretion of the venom. So this is really a venomous fish. Now, a poisonous fish is one that produces its toxic symptoms as a result of an individual ingesting the flesh and thereby becoming intoxicated.
Well, I can certainly see how the two differences between these would tend to become complicated.
Yes, and in our scientific terminology, Earl, we have tried to introduce two new terms which help to clarify this point.
Well, now let's see, ichthyosarcotoxism and ichthyocanthotoxism. Boy, those are really lulus.
Well, in Greek, that breaks down into fish flesh poison. That's what you get from eating poisonous fishes, such as snappers and puffers. And then there is the other term, fish spine poison. That covers the stinging varieties.
Now, this ichthyosarcotoxism is a field that we should mention here. As I remember, the classical example of that is of the Navy officer who, after having eaten some of this poisonous fish and was given an ice cream cone a little bit later, he complained that the ice cream cone was very warm and he was seen to be blowing on it. And then later that evening he had soup for supper, and the soup was freezing cold, whereas actually, of course, the soup was quite warm.
Yes, reversal of temperature sensations is one of the bizarre symptoms found in this picture of fish poisoning.
I see.
However, there is another type that is a very serious one, and this occurs as a result of the individual ingesting a puffer or a tetradon, one of the very common fishes throughout the Pacific and especially around Japan. Now, 1 ounce of the liver of the puffer is capable of producing death within 17 minutes. Now, there are milder forms of fish poisoning, however, such as we find in certain types, the so-called Pacific form and the Caribbean form. Now, these forms are milder. There are certain gastrointestinal disturbances, various neurological sensory disturbances, but very seldom the individual dies.
Oh, I see. Well, I can see that that is a most challenging subject for investigation. We've moved up fairly high in our animal series now, and the next group that we come to are the amphibians, and then the reptiles, finally the birds, and then the mammals.
Well, amphibians include toads and salamanders. You know, the ancients believed that these little fellows, such as we have here, were quite deadly. Actually, they're not as formidable as they might appear.
Well, now, I've seen dogs and cats, young ones, go out in the backyard and attack one of these toads and mouth it a little bit, but they only do it just once.
That's right. Earl, if we'll take the parotid gland here of this toad and squeeze it, you notice that venom being shot there on the glass?
That is really something. I saw someone who missed it and went out here.
Yes, this is the thing that these cats and dogs usually contact, and the reason for mouthing them only once.
Well, I guess that is highly toxic. I suppose it could actually cause the death of a cat or a dog.
Yes, it can.
Well, I suppose that reptiles are probably our best known venom purveyors, and even though there aren't as many of them as there are of fish.
Suppose we skip over reptiles for just a moment, Earl, and talk about mammals. Unfortunately, there are no venomous birds.
I see.
There are two venomous mammals that are quite common, in certain areas that is. One is the shrew. Now, the shrew is dangerous only to very small rodents, but nevertheless it kills these rodents with the use of a venom. The other is that very strange and bizarre creature from Australia. And here he is, the Australian duck-billed platypus.
Well, this is certainly a treat. You know, it isn't very often that we have an opportunity to see a platypus in action. Actually, there are only two in captivity outside of Australia, and those are both in the Bronx Zoo in New York.
Well, when I said that this platypus is an unusual animal, I really meant that. Here we have an animal with the bill of a duck, the webbed feet, again of a duck, the tail of a beaver, the hair of a mammal, spurs like a rooster, has the venom of a snake, lays eggs like a hen, and suckles its young like a mammal.
Well, that certainly sounds to me like a zoological conglomerate, if you could call it that.
Yes, and it was quite a puzzle to scientists for a long time. They are not aggressive creatures, yet the males are equipped with a sharp spur on the hind leg. Normally it is relaxed, but if he is aggravated, the platypus can unsheath the spur. It becomes rigid like a tiny dagger, and if it is driven into the flesh, it can make quite a deep wound. The attack is by a powerful inward motion of the hind legs, so that the two spurs are brought together on its victim like a pair of calipers. Then the venom does the rest.
Well, that venom is pretty strong, is it?
Yes, it is. It has been known to kill hunting dogs, and it can seriously incapacitate a man for several weeks. I'd call that pretty strong, even though it does not seem to be fatal to humans. There is excruciating pain, swelling, and partial paralysis, depending upon how much venom gets through.
It's hard to believe that animals such as these can have such a mean weapon. They certainly look friendly enough here in these films that we've just seen.
Now we can talk about reptiles, if you like. There are only two poisonous lizards.
Let's see, these two over here, I guess.
Yes, one is this Mexican beaded lizard, and the other is this Gila monster here. Of course, we have a great many venomous snakes, one such as this Pacific diamondback, like we have in this cage.
Suppose we take these fellows out and see if we can make a venom extraction in the same manner we would do if we were preparing to make antivenines. This fellow's pretty big. I think I'll just use this other snake stick here. This is one of our poisonous snakes. It is the cottonmouth moccasin. This fellow we don't have usually on our west coast here. It's a very tricky snake, and I want to show you this just for a moment here so you'll get an idea what some of the problems are. You can see how nasty these fellows are. Fortunately, we don't have it in California. So I'll shove this fellow over to Bob Dempster and let him wrestle with him over here while I take out this Pacific diamondback here. And while Dr. Halstead is getting the venom glass ready here, I will pin him. And now, in pinning a rattlesnake, it's really not much of a job. The only thing you have to do is be very careful about your technique. Hold him down and then reach down behind his head here. Pick him up. Now we'll open his mouth and shove his mouth over the edge of this venom glass here. Now the fangs are over the edge there, and I start massaging directly behind the head here. We should see some drops of venom accumulating on the glass there.
Now, in order to be dangerous, this venom must enter the bloodstream where it destroys the red blood corpuscles. To get into the bloodstream, the fangs must first penetrate the skin. The venom itself cannot harm the unbroken skin. What you are seeing now is the same method of extraction that is used in the preparation of these anti-venin kits.
Well, this fellow seems to have given up all the venom that he has there. I think I'll just put him back in his cage here, none the worse for wear.
Well, that's quite a trick. I didn't know that that was one of your talents.
All in day's work. We have any more reptiles this evening?
Well, Earl, there are a great many reptiles that we could talk about, but time does not permit, and really I believe that should be given over to another evening.
Well, I can see that the subject of animal venoms is one that is extremely vast. I think what we should do is have you back on another program in the future and tell us some more about this most interesting work that you've been doing.
Well, thank you, Earl. It was a pleasure to be here.
Well, many thanks for a most interesting
bet.
session.